Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, like all bad ideas, they never kind of go away. They keep bubbling up, and just as we'd assumed, oh well, that's gone. Everyone realized what a really stupid idea it was. Bang! It reappears like NATO expansion. It never goes away. And so the latest really bad idea that seems to have a very long shelf life is the notion of taking Russia's seized foreign currency reserves, which is thought to be in the region of $300 billion, seizing that and handing it to Ukraine. Now, of course, knowing Ukraine, that's going to go pretty quickly. 300 billion isn't going to last very long. So
that's going to be one hell of a weekend party.
But nonetheless, it seemed for a while as if the G7, the EU, the US had decided that this was really not a very good idea. There are all sorts of legal problems attached. But now it's been revived, particularly in light of the difficulties the United States and the EU are having getting more money to Ukraine. So the 60 billion that was supposed to be sent by the United States, well, that's now been shelved to the new year. They don't have to
steal it instead.
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. That's the idea. And then you got the EU, which because of Viktor Orban, they still haven't got a universal agreement to hand over 50 billion euros to Ukraine. So now they're looking around, where can we get our hands on some ready cash? And they say, oh, look, there's all this 300 billion lying around in the European banks. Why don't we hand that over to Ukraine? So I want to just show you a couple of articles.
So what's the due process theory here? I'm sure it's like one of the theories against Trump. Okay, I'm waiting, George. Okay, make my day. Make my day.
Exactly. They don't have any other than we just don't like Russia. So it's the same with Trump. We just don't like Trump. So it's a kind of sui generis. We'll just make up the law to apply just in this one case. And we'll say, yeah, it applies in this one case, but it doesn't apply to anyone else.
It's a bad case if it's only one. It applies to one.
Exactly. So here we have the Financial Times, and it says here, this is the headline and the story: G7 moves closer to seizing Russian assets for Ukraine. So again, they've already seized these assets, which again has no legality. I mean, you can't just go around seizing countries' assets. You can't go around seizing people's assets. I mean, unless without due process of law, you can't just sort of grab somebody. Oh, there's Abramovich. We don't like Abramovich. He's supposed to be close to Putin, and even though no evidence that he is, but oh well, let's take Abramovich's property.
Well, so I mean,
no basis.
A case is, I suppose, again, I'm not a lawyer here, but money laundering, okay, supporting internationally recognized terrorist groups. That's the kind of category. It's the bucket where you could consider that. And, with the drug cartels in Latin America, they have done that. They've taken their assets because they've been involved in internationally recognized nefarious behavior.
But that follows due process of law. You can't just simply say, well, I think this guy's involved in drug trafficking.
So I mean, let's say you're convicted of drug trafficking.
If you're convicted, yeah, I agree.
You didn't let me finish. You didn't let me finish. Okay? Sure. There's been no trial. Okay, and I don't know what the jurisdiction would be. There isn't one. Okay, but what they're trying to do is trying to liken it to something where it's completely apples and oranges. That's the point I was trying to make.
No, that's right. So it's bad enough when they do it. Again, when you have these Russian oligarchs, they seize their property, again, without any due process of law. I mean, what was their crime? Well, they were close to Putin. I mean, amazing the number of people who are close to Putin, and then so they seize them. but in this case, you can't even do it in terms of a country's foreign currency reserves. I mean, that's that's something no one touches that. No one's ever touched that. They did touch it in the case of Russia, but now they're going for the one step further. Hey, now that we've touched it, maybe we can just sort of decide whom to give it to. And so here we have U.S. discussion paper argues confiscating some of Moscow's $300 billion is consistent with international law.
Okay.
This is it's almost like it's like the Colorado Constitutional Court. Yeah, it's it's in accord with the Constitution.
It's a little complicated, but
It's
consistent. Okay, all right.
So it says Western nations are actively exploring ways to seize Russian central bank assets to fund Ukraine as political disputes in the US and Europe threaten its flow of financial support. G7 officials have intensified talks in recent weeks on spending some of the roughly $300 billion in immobilized Russian sovereign assets, a radical step that would open a new chapter in the West's financial warfare against Moscow.
Let's stress something here. Some of the roughly 300 billion in immobilized Russian, here's the operative word, sovereign assets. Let me repeat that, everyone. Sovereign.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Exactly right. The push comes as two crucial financial aid packages for Ukraine, blah, blah, with, Hungary in the EU. And then he goes on.
So here, okay. So NATO wants to expand. Russia refuses that, gives an opportunity, but they continue that. So Russia reacts here. So now the Congress and the European Union, they can't get their own people, their own organizations to pony up for a war that is less and less popular. So why don't we steal somebody else's? I mean, this is such an indictment of even the democratic process here. You can't, through your own mechanisms, you can't get it done. So what are you going to do? You're going to be a thief?
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent point. Exactly. You're waging this war, and you say, no, this is it. It's so fundamental to Western values, and we have to stop Putin. You can't get your own public to support it. They're not going to pay for it. The war you say is so essential. So, well, let's just see if we can steal somebody's assets and use that to fund it.
And I don't know if it's in the article because I haven't read it, so I'm going to go through it with George. But George, you're going to have to convince me that like J.P. Morgan and these other major financial institutions, they will be the facilitator, and they'll take a nice hefty slice for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, if they give it to Ukraine, it'll come with a lot of strings attached, like where you can spend the money. You will be spending the money in the United States, purchasing goods from the United States. And again, or we can put it into J.P. Morgan, and so and they'll make some money on that. I mean, they're not just going to give it here, guys.
Oh no,
300 billion.
I think
spend it all at once.
I'm sure there will be a very generous slush fund. Okay, very generous. Okay, but George is right. The bulk of it's going to stay in Western institutions, and every time that they release a tranche of it, 15% on that, we'll take it from the balance. Thank you very much.
That's right. But of course, they've been earning money all this time because this money, this 300 billion, has been lying in these banks. So all this money that they've been earning, they've been pocketing all this money. I mean, since they seized it, hey, we get to keep all this interest payments on this. And then but until now, G7 governments have mostly.
No. George, go back to the first one. It's
okay. I thought, we haven't read that.
Very important.
Absolutely. Seizing Russian assets could provide an alternative stream of funding for Kiev, especially given the expected huge costs of post-war reconstruction. So,
this is very, very important because, and Nikolai Petrov has written about it. We've had him on the podcast here. And I try to be magnanimous because I've been against this war from the beginning because I believe it truly should have never started. And I have no animosity towards Ukrainians. I do not. Against Ukraine, I do not. And I do look forward to the post-war reconstruction. And I think everyone can contribute, including Russia. But if this is done, George, forget it.
Right.
You broke it, it's yours.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think this is what you were saying before we started, that if they do go ahead and do this,
it's a breach forever.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there can be no real serious negotiations. But until now, G7 governments have mostly balked at such a move, fearing that some foreign investors in dollar and euro assets would take flight. You
think, George? You think?
Yes.
Ever since they took the Venezuelan gold, it's starting a trend. Okay.
Yeah. But even at least with the Venezuelan gold, at least it's still in the Bank of England. I mean, it's still lying in the vault somewhere. They haven't decided.
You hope.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they were thinking in terms of let's give it to Guaido. Let's give all this gold bullion to Guaido. Thank you very much. But I don't think they went as they actually went ahead. I think you're right. I mean, we're not sure but they didn't give it to Guaido.
Well, they did give him aid, and they spent it on hookers and blow. So I think they really. Guaido ended up being a very disappointing candidate since he's living in his mother's basement now somewhere in Miami.
He's a professor. He's a
oh yeah, professor.
He's a professor.
Like Dr. Sebastian Gorka.
Sebastian Gorka, exactly. Professor, exactly. Yes.
Call me professor. Okay.
That's right. Yes. Although Washington has never publicly backed confiscation, the US has privately taken a more assertive stance in recent weeks, arguing in G7 committees that there is a route to seizing assets consistent with international law. But this is very interesting because it's the Americans who are now pushing this because well, first of all, it's their baby, obviously. It's Biden's baby. This is their project, and Ukraine, much more so than the Europeans. Europeans are just trudging along. But also that it's going to hurt the Europeans. This money is lying in Europe. So it's going to be the Europeans who are on the hook. I mean, they're the ones who are going to suffer as a result when everyone takes flight and say, well, we're not going to keep our money in Europe. Look what they're capable of doing. So the Americans are going, yeah, go ahead. Don't worry about any repercussions. So it is interesting.
This is what the United States does to its friends. Amazing.
And there's a G7 members. This is the U.S. government. It's at a U.S. government discussion paper seen by the Financial Times. Okay, G7 members and other specially affected states could seize Russian sovereign assets as a countermeasure to induce Russia to end its aggression. This is kind of this bizarre kind of logic.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yes. Exactly.
Wow. The level of this is the most shallow level of thinking. I was hoping for a little bit more nuanced theory of the case, George, but this is the starting point.
That's right. This is the
induce Russia. It will enrage Russia. It's not going to induce Russia to end any so-called aggression. It's just the opposite.
Exactly. But it's of a piece with the Jens Stoltenberg theory of the case, which is, well, the more we send to Ukraine, the more likely it is that Russia will come to the negotiating table and therefore give whatever Ukraine wants. You think, well, isn't it more likely that the more that it will only induce the Russians to bring in their own weaponry and to be more determined to prevail in the war? I mean, it's a theory.
And the Russian government,
in any kind of empirical evidence.
And the Russian government has made it very clear: the longer it takes, the worse it's going to be for Ukraine at the end of this conflict. They make this is well known, documented. The longer it goes on, the more you give it military aid, financial aid, the worse off Ukraine will be. This is policy.
And if we examine the historical precedent of that, remember when the winter war between the Soviet Union and Finland, which people always celebrate and say how this was so glorious, the Finns, the Soviet Union made a number of territorial demands from Finland before it attacked. Finland said no, Soviet Union attacked, Soviet Union won that war. It was a tough war, but it won the war. The peace terms were much harsher than Soviet Union's initial demands. I mean, you know, having lost so many lives, you bet you're going to make much harsher demands. So a U.S. official said Washington was engaged in active conversations on the use of Russian sovereign assets and believed there was a short timeline to make a decision. Short. It has to be short.
I don't understand that. What you mean? You'd like do it in the middle of the night?
It means they want to do it right now. It's like you know the Jack Smith in the United States. We got to get the trial off and up and running just after New Year. We got to do it.
Well, no, but it's even worse than that. It's worse than that. At least in this case, in the case that you mentioned, there would be a trial. There's no due process here.
They just want a decision.
It's done.
That's it. That's right. But the thing is, they make a decision. So in other words, the Americans are telling the Europeans, you need to make a decision, and it's got to be fast. You know, this is the way the Americans always operate. You know, it's like, you know, whether it's before the invasion of Iraq, it's got to be right now. We've got to move. And you know, and when you tell them, hey, but what about Saddam Hussein is pretty much conceded on every point. There's nothing, there's no reason for you to go to war. He's given you everything you want. No, we got to do it. We got to move. We got to do it fast. Did the same thing in Yugoslavia. That's how the Americans operate. Hey, it's got to be short timeline. But there's never any explanation why, other than that.
Well, you actually could apply it to the weeks prior to this stage of the conflict in Ukraine. The Russians sent out a suggestion, a point of reference to start to avoid this conflict. No, we're not doing that. We're not. Nope. We got to act now. Okay.
That's right. That's right. They suggested it would be discussed at a possible G7 leaders meeting to coincide with the second anniversary in February of Russia's full invasion of Ukraine. Yeah, I always like this, the G7, because the G7, it's all made up with the same characters. I think 5 of the 7 are all NATO members.
Right.
Japan is just simply a satellite of the United States, at least as far as foreign policy is concerned. And then who's the 7th? Is there anyone else who's?
I think they're all.
So they're all. So everyone's
Japan.
They're all NATO members with the exception of Japan.
Right. Canada's a member of
Canada, Germany, Italy, France, UK. Yeah, that's right. So it is. So everyone 6 out of 7 are NATO members. Yeah. EU proposal.
They call it an anniversary. You know, the English language is kind of faulty in that sense. Okay.
It's like, well, it does sound like, you know, you bring a cake with some.
Well, they're going to come with party hats. Well, I don't know if 300 billion is at stake. I'd bring a party hat.
2 little candles on the cake. EU proposals have so far stopped short of seizing the Russian assets themselves, instead aiming to skim off profits generated for financial institutions such as Euroclear, where 191 billion euros in sovereign assets are held.
So skimming off.
Skimming off the profits. So in other words, because these are assets, that's a lot of money, $300 billion. That makes a lot of money. I mean, you know, you're earning a lot of interest on that. So they're skimming off the top. So all this time they've been skimming off the top. That's quite a nice little tidy little sum of money, which doesn't really belong to the Europeans. So that's, you know, they've been doing quite well. You know, this 2 years they've been skimming off the top. But calls for tapping the assets themselves have grown louder as cracks have emerged in the political consensus on additional funding for Ukraine. So again, as you say, you know, hey, we can't get our publics to support it. You know, we go to Parliament. Parliament says no. We go consult elected prime ministers. They say no. Okay, well, let's here's some money. That doesn't belong to us. Let's just take it.
It's acting like the mafia.
Mm. 8 packages worth $60 billion dollars and 50 billion euros, respectively, failed to win approval. Lord David Cameron. It's so great that he's back.
I didn't know he was a lord.
They made him a lord in order to get him this position in the government, because he was outside the parliament, so there was no way you could have him foreign secretary. So Rishi Sunak made him a lord. That means he's now has a seat in the House of Lords, so therefore he can be foreign secretary. Otherwise, he'd just be a private citizen, and then you couldn't really have that. So they made him a lord and made him foreign secretary.
What do we have to do to become a lord?
Just apply to be, say, I want to be in this government. I want to join Rishi Sunak's government.
Lord George. It has a nice ring to it.
I think so. Yes. Lord George of George Szamuely. Yeah, Lord George Szamuely. I like that.
Well, maybe Lord Buddy.
Yeah, but that's it. But yeah, I got to be a lord. I got to join the government. Lord David Cameron, the UK Foreign Secretary, has expressed confidence that there is a legal. The American
of all people, you're going to David Cameron. Okay, this is like, oh my God. Bring out the clowns, please.
That's right. Yeah, but it's always the Americans say, yeah, there's a legal way we can do this, and then on comes the UK Foreign Secretary, whoever he is. It doesn't matter if it's Cameron or William Hague or whatever. Yeah. We our lawyers have looked at it and said, yeah, there's definitely a legal route for this. Legal route to confiscate the assets, and has suggested the UK might act with the US if other G7 allies cannot be convinced. So it's a kind of coalition of the willing.
It wouldn't happen any other way, George.
Coalition of the willing. It's a thin coalition, and this time it's only the US and the UK. Extraordinary times require extraordinary measures, he told a UK parliamentary committee, adding he was pushing hard for the proposal within the G7.
So he got the email from Washington.
Exactly. They told him, can you push hard, please? This is at the time when the Biden administration has said, we're not signing any trade deal with the UK. So after all the idea that we're going to sign a trade deal, they're not going to sign the trade deal with the UK. So however much the UK fawns and slobbers and grovels before Washington, they still don't get anything from Washington. He denied that there would be a chilling effect.
Well, why would you mention that? If you, again, he's barreling himself. Okay. Okay. No, it's not the sanctions. No, of course. And, goes on for 50 paragraphs. No, it's not the sanctions. Well, then why are you talking about it? Okay. The same thing, there won't be a chilling effect. Well, why do you bring it up?
No, that's right. Chilling effect on inward investment, insisting that those investors likely to feel perturbed would already be pretty chilled by the fact we have frozen. I don't understand the reason.
Well, I think that because they haven't really done anything, people are saying, okay, we're going to see where it goes. I think everyone's just having a holding pattern right now because they're not actually going to seize these sovereign assets. I mean, right. Nobody in their right mind. And so what I think is that, the fact that they haven't done it now that they're contemplating it, I think you'll see a run on the bank. I think that's that situation.
Right, but he's saying they're already pretty chilled by the fact that we have frozen.
Yeah, now, well, it doesn't mean. Could it mean that they haven't made any additional investments? They're doing a holding pattern. You can interpret it in a number of different ways. But the fact of the matter is, the two operative words here, chilling effect. It is real.
Right, but that's why. But I think I mean, it's obviously it's very bad when you seize countries' assets. But this is a standard procedure. It's now become standard that you can just grab a country's foreign, like the United States grabbed Iran's assets and say that's it. Iran doesn't have access to its own assets. But nonetheless, I mean, to go, the additional step, which means that we're actually going to take this and we're going to spend it the way we want it. I mean, that's outright theft. Yep. So he's saying, oh, well, it doesn't really matter because these people are already pretty chilled by what you've done. But okay, they're used to that. They're used to, hey, seizing assets, but they're not used to essentially theft. I mean, just stealing it and then spending it on whatever you want.
And also, we mentioned already here Venezuela, but now we're going into the realm of the big spenders. Okay, I'm thinking of the Gulf countries. They're going to say, look, you can do this to Panama, you can do this. Obviously, you have a 50-year longstanding anti-Iran. We're all used to that policy. Now you're going against Russia. Well, last time I checked, the global South is not going along with this, okay?
No.
And that's where the money is being generated. That's where the growth in the world is
Right.
being generated, is the global South. So be careful what you do. And I think this is a disastrous policy because then people will say, look, you crossed the line. Shit, you can freeze stuff, and now you're going to spend somebody else's money?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we put our money into your institutions, because you're not supposed to do that.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. The US officials said the G7's legal discussions reflected the importance of abiding by international law in responding to Russia's invasion. So they got all these lawyers, they brought in all these big shot lawyers, from the top law firms. They say, well, what do you think? Is this legal? And yeah, we gotta abide by international law. But that's the wrong advice, because already David Cameron and Biden already know what's the conclusion that you're going to come to.
George, common sense dictates that if you have to fish around, go to the white shoe law firm, say, can you give me a case? That logic and common sense would tell there isn't really much of a case. Right. You see what I mean? I mean, right. It should be, most of these things, most legal disputes are pretty obvious, okay? And when they go into the realm of, well, you have to create a unique theory, right. That means you're already in trouble, okay? Right. Because you're creating a very bad precedent. You can push it through because, as George pointed out, it's a political imperative for the powers that be. But it is a real challenge to law, as it should be.
Right. That was the I mean, before the attack on Yugoslavia, Tony Blair was sort of having, qualms about it. Well, is this in accord with international law? So, he got some lawyers and they said, no, it isn't. You need another enabling UN Security Council resolution. So he relays this to Madeleine Albright, the US Secretary of State, and she says, get yourself some new lawyers. And that's basically the position of the Americans. They did the same thing before the invasion of Iraq. They look, well, is this legal? Of course, the lawyers say no. I mean, it isn't legal. And then George W. Bush then said, oh, well, hey, I'm really frightened of these lawyers. I mean, that's it. They just have despised the lawyers until they come up with the legal mumbo jumbo that they're looking for. The goal over the coming weeks would be to work through all the critical issues so the G7 could move together. Then he says, European countries, particularly Germany, France, and Belgium, have been reluctant to make such a move. Now, whenever you hear this, like Germany, France, and Belgium, yeah, they're reluctant, but then you just whack them on the side of the head and tell them to get with the plan, and then after a while, yeah, now that I look at it, yeah, maybe there is a legal basis for handing this money over. It's a familiar pattern. Germany from France always, I don't think this is legal. They're going to come round.
Oh, the bulk of the 300 billion euros of Russian assets are held in Europe.
Yeah, that's the key. So they're the ones who are going to be on the hook, if there's retaliation. Even so, one Western official said there were definitely live conversations within the G7 and a growing consensus in favor of using Russian sovereign assets for Ukraine. There's always a growing consensus. And then the US paper argued that Russia's invasion of Ukraine meant the seizure of assets could be pursued as a lawful countermeasure by those states that have been injured, especially affected by Russia's violation of the international law.
Okay, where is that? Where are those laws? Okay, I'd really like to see that kind of legislation or a legal a theory that exists, because it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, and that's the point. You can't just simply make that decision. The US and the UK can't make that decision and say, yeah, I think that this money belongs to the injured party. Who the hell are you? You know, it has to be some kind of legal judicial adjudication before you can determine that this belongs to the person that you think it belongs to. We need to find a way to get cash to Ukraine in whatever form, said one EU diplomat. And more countries are pointing at the assets and wondering why they are still sitting there. It's like they're looking at this pot of money sitting, well, why don't we just help ourselves to this pot of money? I mean, well, it's very tempting, when you see a pot of money lying there, you think, well, why don't I help myself to that? So,
George, it's just so amazing how quickly in Western countries led by the United States and the UK, they just completely shred international humanitarian law. They completely shred the rule of law, due process in rapid succession. I mean, in a blink of an eye, almost. Okay, after decades and decades of convincing the world this is a better way to do it. You have to have due process. All parties have to be able to give their case. There has to be good precedent. I mean, we could go on and on. I mean, it's amazing how they're just shredding this so quickly.
It is, and particularly when all of these things, like the rule of law, proper adjudication, everyone has his right to his day in court. All of that is enshrined in those innumerable international documents that all the Western countries have signed, that made everyone else in the world sign them. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, any number of them. And the OSCE, well, if you want to belong to this group, you better sign all these documents. Well, you're violating all of those documents. I mean, that's precisely what they say. You can't simply help yourself to somebody's money without there being a proper legal procedure.
Well, maybe it will be presented here shortly, but again, isn't this really quite amazing? Is that these enshrined norms, let's put it that way, that the West designed and propagated and in many ways enforced. But there's this assumption, at least so far what we've gone through, is that Russia's not going to do anything about it. Well, it might.
Well, that's something we're going
to. Okay, good. I'm sorry.
We're going to talk about that.
Okay.
About how Russia would respond. And then he says, this is again another article in the Financial Times. They kind of very excited by this. The legal case for seizing Russia's assets. And then he says about 260 billion euros were immobilized. And then the bulk of it, some 210 billion, is held in the EU. So that's a big chunk, 210 of 260. So that's more than 80%. And then including cash and government bonds, and I said the US, by comparison, has only frozen a small amount of Russian state assets, some 5 billion. So that's a very small amount. That's less than 2%. And therefore, and they're so they're in the driving seat, even though it's basically going to have about less than 2% of these Russian assets. And then within Europe, the bulk of the assets, 191 billion euros, are held at Euroclear, a central securities depository headquartered in Belgium. France has immobilized the second largest amount, some 19 billion. Now, Belgium is not going to have much of a say in all of this. It's not a member of the G7. It's a very small country, and it kind of does what it's told. But the bulk of it is in Belgium.
Yeah, I'd be very curious about what the statutes of Euroclear are, about what they can and cannot do with assets. But I guess I'm being nitpicking right now. Okay.
Well, that's right. I mean, the statutes are obviously clear. I mean, what you're
that's why people put their money there, because they're
right.
clear.
But the point is that you know, you can always just simply ignore the statutes. I mean, that's what you do with statutes. You ignore them and say, this is a special case, and therefore we can ignore the statute. Washington has not publicly backed confiscation of the frozen assets, but it has made the case for it privately. So they don't say it publicly, which of course would be, you know, it is interesting that they don't want to say it publicly, because it's a serious business. You say it publicly, and you're gonna cause a financial crisis, even if you're saying it publicly, that we believe that it's perfectly legal to seize foreign currency reserves of another country. One recent G7 discussion paper written by US officials described it as a countermeasure permitted under international law that would induce Russia to end its aggression. Again, what is this law?
What is this law?
Where's that law?
Where's the hyperlink? Where's the
hyperlink? The statute.
Well,
according to the paper, such a move would be considered a legitimate response if implemented by states injured and specially affected by Russia's aggression. But again, it does, you know, even if you make that argument that they're entitled to it, there still has to be an adjudication. United States can't just decide, well, I think you deserve it because you're the injured party, so we're just going to take this money and give it to you. That's not how, you know, you don't just have a decision made by one country. And then it says that could include allies of Ukraine who have bankrolled its economy and military during the war. So now that becomes quite expansive as to who's the injured party, because anybody who apparently was given aid to Ukraine is now an injured party and has rights to help themselves to some of this money, which is very nice.
This is all a political decision. There's no basis in law for it. Okay, so that's why, you know, and that's why they use these words, George. Legitimate response.
Right.
Well, without a court ruling, without all of the parties airing their position, it cannot be anything but a political decision.
And let's recall, if you really believe this, if you really believe that this is in accord with international law, there's an easy remedy. You go to the World Court, the International Court of Justice at The Hague, and ask them for an opinion. And that's, you know, their rulings are, you know, then it's not a criminal court. Their rulings are advisory. But if there's a question in your mind about the legality of it, there's the World Court. It's there for a reason, which is to, you know, answer such questions. What, you know, can you take somebody else's foreign assets and give it to another country? I don't think the World Court is going to say, yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, that's entirely in accord with international law. But they're not doing it. No one is saying here that we should go ask the World Court for an opinion. And then it says that could include, yeah, the US officials suggested the seized assets could be dispersed to Ukraine in tranches, for instance, through the World Bank. Tranches, that's good, Bob.
Oh, now so they want to. Now they want to muddy up the World Bank. You know, they like, let's spread it out. Let's spread it out.
That's
okay,
right. That's right. Yeah.
And you know, the World Bank, they're going to say, we're going to put this on the ledger. I mean, how did we get this?
Right.
How do we explain how we got this money?
Right. That's right.
Under what description?
That's right. Exactly. But you know, that's exactly right. I don't think the World Bank is going to go for it, because it's just again, it doesn't belong to the United States. I know the United States acts as if the World Bank belongs to it, but it doesn't actually. It's not a branch of the US government. This is the case. This is cast as an advance on the compensation to Ukraine that Russia would ultimately be required to pay under international law.
Well, we're really getting ahead of ourselves here.
We are getting ahead of ourselves. And who is going to do this requiring? Who's
well, I don't know, George. Maybe I'm going to preempt you here, but because I don't want to forget. I think, George, it's pretty obvious that the road that the US is going down enforcing its G7 partners is that Russia, when this is all said and done, will demand reparations for all the countries that supported the Ukraine effort. Okay, so basically, you're gonna have to give it back. Now, you figure out how you're gonna do it,
Right.
but that's going to impact Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. And this is a critical point. It's going to throw a wrench into everything.
Right. No question. I mean, Russia is not just going to say, yeah, all right, $300 billion of our assets, fine. We'll just overlook it. We won't. That's a lot of money. And
the precedent that it sets.
Right, exactly. The idea of confiscating Russian sovereign assets is legally fraught.
What paragraph is this?
Fraught.
What paragraph is this? Yes. Why isn't this in the first paragraph?
Exactly.
Why isn't this the first sentence of the article?
Yes. Central bank assets are protected under customary international law. Yeah. Actions that appear to cast doubt over that principle would have profound implications of the financial system. Yeah, I think you're right.
Think? Yeah.
I think you've got a point there. But advocates argue that such confiscation can, in this case, be justified. Yeah, there's always, in this case, always a special case. In this case, be justified under international law as an equitable remedy to push Russia to compensate Ukraine for war damage.
Who determines what's equitable, George?
Well, exactly. You can't. That's the point. You can't just make that determination. Who's going to do this? I mean, as I say, there is a world court. You could go to the world court. You can't go to the International Criminal Court because Russia doesn't acknowledge the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Neither, of course, does the United States. So it's a hard one to go to the ICC for an opinion. But just to say, well, we know what international law is, and then it's an equitable remedy. You can put that in your, some legal justification. Biden, you can get Biden to say this before the cameras, and he talks such absolute drivel, but it has no legal basis whatsoever. And then it says Philip Zelikow. He's a kind of a veteran diplomat. He's been around since forever, since the first George Bush. Philip Zelikow, a former senior U.S. diplomat, now at Stanford University, has cited a precedent, the internationally imposed compensation after the 1990 Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. However, that was done on the basis of a UN Security Council resolution. So the compensation in Iraq was for—
Where is that, George? What, did they forget to write that?
They forgot about the UN Security Council resolution.
Okay, so it isn't a precedent.
It's not a precedent, exactly. It's not the precedent.
I don't know, George. How do these people end up at Stanford University? I mean, I'm serious. I mean, and what kind of intellectual integrity does the writer of this author have? Couldn't he have said, well, but in that case, there was a United Nations Security Council resolution, but it wasn't mentioned, okay? This is how propaganda works. It's the omission, omission.
Stanford University, I mean, they got some great people there. They got people like Michael McFaul. I mean, these are first-rate minds, great academics.
Well, Stanford University should have its accreditation revoked.
Then it says, opponents worry that such a move would damage the international rules-based order. It's hard to say it even without laughing,
I like this. Let me do it myself here. Okay. Opponents worry that such a move would damage the internationally rules-based order and undermine the trust that countries show when they place reserves with other nations, said Peter Lavelle and George Szamuely at the Gaggle. Okay.
That's right. That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah, quoting us. Yes, definitely. That's the latter argument carries considerable sway with some EU member states and the European Central Bank. This is always very funny, well, it carries sway, but who the hell cares? Because the only opinion that matters is the United States. So, yeah, well, Europeans are worried. Yeah, it's good. Well, we're not going to do it because the German foreign minister, the head of the Bundesbank, I mean, he says that we can't do it. Well, if the Bundesbank head says we can't do it, then You know, what can we do?
Well, it's always these, if they actually go through with this really nightmarish scenario, so the European Central, well, we were against it though, but we were against it. Okay, well, so what? Okay.
It was exactly, and I'm sure if Emmanuel Macron is giving an interview tonight, he will say, "Well, I am not for this because it will set a dangerous precedent, and we cannot just hand foreign assets to whomever we want." And then, of course, next week he will change his mind.
Well, but then all of their assets in Africa, they'll just disappear the next day and say, "Well, that's our compensation. You're taking it from the Russians. We're going to take it from you, and there's nothing you can do about it because there's a precedent. You took it from the Russians. We're going to take all of your African assets in a New York minute, okay?
Yeah.
Because governments like yours supported this illegality.
Well, exactly,
and the implications of this, you guys, is so immense.
You're absolutely right, because of course, once you kind of create some legally bogus justification, then you're gonna, the African countries can come up with their own legally bogus justification. Well, you have to compensate us for colonial depredations. We suffered for 100 years under
and we're going to have to calculate the value of every slave you took, okay? And it's going to be a big number.
That's right. Confiscating Russian assets would, for some, cross a line by suggesting to countries such as China or Saudi Arabia that sovereign assets stowed in euros or dollars might not always be safe.
Well, this guy's so smart. I mean, what do you think this guy's IQ is? Room temperature?
Yeah, he looks like he's smart enough to get a graduate position at Stanford University. The ECB earlier this year warned member states of the risk of undermining the, quote, legal and economic foundations, unquote, on which the international role of the euro rests. So they say this, in other words, just to be on the record. Now I'm on the record. Yeah. Some guy from the ECB is saying, yeah, this is it's risking the legal and economic foundations on which the international role of the euro rests. Good. Now let's go and get a bite to eat.
Anyway, Zelensky, the panhandler, he keeps bothering us, okay?
Officials are aiming for consensus among G7 countries to seize the assets. But France, Germany, and Italy remain extremely cautious. Ooh.
Yeah, the Germany, the same country that allowed its pipeline to be blown up by the Americans. Yeah, I'm sure they're very cautious, George.
Very cautious, yes, that's right. European officials fear possible retaliation if state immunity is undermined. One noted the US holds only a very small amount of Russian central bank assets by comparison.
It's again, these people that write these articles, why isn't state immunity mentioned much earlier in the article, George?
Right, exactly.
I mean, this whole article, the first paragraph, George and I could rewrite in 5 minutes, okay? The sovereign assets, immunity, state immunity of assets, that would give a clearer mind. But basically what they're convinced, the reader is saying, okay, it's a problematic idea, but it's a good idea. That's what they're trying to do.
That's right.
Because of Russia.
That's right. That's right. No, you're absolutely right. And what they're trying to do is to suggest that this is the Financial Times, that they're being balanced. We're presenting the other side of it. But nonetheless, it's obvious where this article is going, saying, yeah, but there's a legal basis for it. We don't know what it is, but there's obviously a legal basis for seizing somebody else's money. From an EU perspective, we have much more to lose. So the EU officials, so at least here you have the EU, which is kind of aware of this. We're kind of being pushed into doing this. Is going to undermine international confidence in the EU, in the euro, in the banks of the European Union. Is going to undermine it. The Americans, by comparison, they're hardly touched. They've only got 5 billion. It's less than 2%. But they're very eager to push us to do this. Yeah,
and keep in mind the economic growth, what there is to speak of in Europe, is financialization. It's not production. It is It's how the financial system is able to generate profits, not through production. So this is a very, very delicate area of the European economy because they're very good at doing it. And up until this point, don't hold your breath here, people trusted these institutions, okay? Where does this money come from, George? Does it all come from Stuttgart or Rome? No, it comes from around the world, okay? And that's how they can generate profits and positive GDP and all that through an efficient banking system. You're really, really going out on the ledge here by tampering this.
Exactly right. I mean, it was bad enough when they were just seizing people's property, because then, say, well, hey, I mean, countries like the UK rely on all sorts of rich, somewhat shady characters buying property in London.
All over the world, right?
Yeah, because that's basically how they funnel their money around. It's a nice money laundering scheme. You buy property in London and then, you sell it. So suddenly, hey, they might seize my property in London and they're going to go away. But that was bad enough. But this is no justification for. So Russia's options to counter with litigation are limited. They don't explain why is it limited. I mean, I guess because the courts in Europe just won't bother to address Russia's concerns. So they say, well, the counter with litigation are limited, so we can just simply take your sovereign assets and you have no recourse in the courts. Well, okay. However, Russia will find other ways to reciprocate. That would mean inflicting more harm on businesses in Russia and potential other damages, says this guy who's a professor of law. And then he then says, sovereign immunity cuts both ways. Germany is still in some countries the target of war damages, going back to the Second World War. So which it's kind of a slight sore point, Germany, well, yeah, Wirtschaftswunder, and then, but everything that you did, you pretty much still never really paid any compensation. So, and the Poles have already, what was it, $2 trillion bill that
something like that. Now they're working on They're working on the Russian case.
Exactly. Good luck with collecting. So rather than seizing the assets themselves, the EU is working on a plan to skim off extraordinary profits that Euroclear generates by holding Russia's assets.
That doesn't word. I'm sorry, George, but how does the word skim off strike you? It sounds like a dirty business to me.
Well, it is, because if you're holding assets
of somebody else's.
If somebody else's assets, yeah, it's earning interest. That's why you keep money in a bank, because it's earning interest. That interest belongs to Russia. But what they're saying is that this interest that is being earned, we're just going to take that interest and say that it belongs to us.
But we
have a right to do whatever we want with it.
Under what law is a financial institution, allowed to skim off profits from your assets? Where is the law?
Where's the law? That's right. That's right. The Belgian Central Securities Depository earned about 3 billion last year from reinvesting cash from matured securities that cannot be paid out to Russia. It earned. It didn't earn anything. It's not their money. You didn't earn 3 billion euros last year. It earned 3 billion from reinvesting cash from matured securities that cannot be paid out to Russia. Cannot be paid out because they said we're not going to pay it, and so it cannot be as if. Well, it just can't be done. So we're going to keep this 3 billion euros. But these proposals have proven controversial, with some countries fearing the repercussions from even this more limited step. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't belong to you.
It's just opening up a Pandora's box, really.
Yeah.
And they know this. That's why it hasn't happened. Okay. I mean, because they've been thinking about it, and they're getting really desperate. Everything about the Ukraine project is turning into desperation.
Right. But that's right. They've been thinking about it. But the Americans are now really applying the pressure. So they did that. That's why suddenly they're writing about this, because the Americans say, we got to do it, and there's a short timeline. officials have acknowledged that the live discussion within the G7 could help move the EU proposals along. And then this is the New York Times, which is also now weighing in and says, US and Europe eye Russian assets to aid Ukraine as funding dries up. And
But why isn't U.S. and Europe greedily eye? Why can't they? They like that kind of language, right?
Exactly, greedily eye. Yes, they do like that language. When you're writing about Trump or the Republicans or Putin or Viktor Orban, all the people that you don't like, they greedily eye or whatever. And then the Biden administration is quietly signaling new support for seizing more than $300 billion in Russian central bank assets stashed in Western. What is stashed in Western?
Only Russian stash money. Oh, geez, guys, they're all failed creative writing majors. They all are. That.
Yes, that's right. And has begun urgent discussions with allies about using the funds to aid Ukraine's war effort at a moment when financial support is waning. And then it says, until recently, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has argued that without action by Congress, seizing the funds was not something that is legally permissible in the United States. Even with action by Congress, it is not legal. I mean, just because Congress can act, you can't just simply seize somebody else's property, whatever Congress does. It still doesn't automatically belong to you. There has also been concern among some top American officials that nations around the world would hesitate to keep their funds at the New York Federal Reserve or in dollars if the United States established a precedent for seizing the money. So yeah, I mean that's a concern, which is why they're shoving it onto the Europeans. Let them deal with the fallout. But the administration, in coordination with the G7, has begun taking another look at whether it can use its existing authorities or if it should seek congressional action to use the funds. So that's the range of the discussion. Do we need additional congressional legislation, or do we already have all the authority that we need to seize somebody else's assets?
It's really extraordinary. They're just looking for a way around this to break the law. I mean, a congressional decision on this isn't worth anything. It isn't at all. Nothing. No, okay. No. And if it were legal, it would have already been done. It's illegal.
That's right. Exactly right. Support for such legislation has been building in Congress, giving the Biden administration optimism that it could be granted the necessary authority. Again, it doesn't matter. Yeah, of course, Congress will say, yeah, sure. I mean, it's not their money. Well, yeah, let's take somebody else's money. I mean, Congress couldn't care less about, about international law or anything like that. Yeah. It's not, U.S. money that's being appropriated. Take someone else's money. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what Congress does. The talks among finance ministers, central bankers, diplomats, and lawyers have intensified in recent weeks, with the Biden administration pressing Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, and Japan to come up with a strategy by February the 24th, the second anniversary of the invasion. The more than $300 billion in Russian assets under discussion have already been out of Moscow's control for more than a year. After the invasion of Ukraine, the United States, along with Europe and Japan, used sanctions to freeze the assets, denying Russia access to its international reserve. But seizing the assets would take matters a significant step further and require careful legal consideration. Let's be very careful. President Biden has not yet signed off on the strategy, and many of the details remain under heated discussion. Policymakers must determine if the money will be channeled directly to Ukraine or used to its benefit in other ways. Well, that isn't, again, not really the issue.
But I mean, at least they're admitting that everybody wants their cut.
Yes. They are also discussing what kinds of guardrails might be associated with the fund, such as whether the money could be used only for reconstruction and budgetary purposes to support Ukraine's economy, or whether, like the funds Congress is debating, it could be spent directly on the military effort. Either way, it's going to come back to the United States. I mean, whichever way. I mean, since you give money to Ukraine, you say, yeah, but you kind of owe us already a lot of money, so you can just hand it straight over to us. That'll do nicely. Seizing such large sums of money from another sovereign nation would be without precedent. And such an action could have unpredictable legal ramifications and economic consequences. It would almost certainly lead to lawsuits and retaliation from Russia. Very little of the Russian assets, perhaps 5 billion or so, by some estimates, are in the hands of US institutions, but a significant chunk of Russia's foreign reserves are held in US dollars, both in the United States and in Europe. The United States has the power to police transactions involving its currency and use its sanctions to immobilize dollar-denominated assets, all of which have done a great deal to enhance global confidence in the dollar. We got to keep our money in dollars. It's worth its weight in gold. The bulk of the Russian deposits are believed to be in Europe, including Switzerland and Belgium, which are not part of the G7. As a result, diplomatic negotiations are underway over how to gain access to these funds, some of which are held in euros and other currencies.
The diplomatic negotiations are underway over how to steal assets, how to steal.
Right. And we know these diplomatic negotiations, basically the Americans are telling the Europeans, you got to do it. And there's no argument about that, just do it. And it says, American officials were surprised that President Vladimir Putin did not repatriate the funds before the Ukraine invasion, but in interviews over the past year, they have speculated that Mr. Putin did not believe the funds would be seized because they were left untouched after his invasion and annexation of Crimea in 2014. And bringing the funds home to Russia would have been another tip-off that an invasion was imminent. At the time, Mr. Putin was vigorously denying American and British charges that he was preparing for military action. I've never really understood why this money was left in the foreign banks. I mean, it was always struck me as strange.
Yeah, well, maybe Russia naively believed in the sanctity of the Western financial system. Then the Russians were proven wrong.
Right. It's really naive. One G7 official said the coalition had been considering a variety of options for how to use Russia's assets. A variety of options. It's always, when you steal some money, you're thinking about, how am I going to spend this money? Should I take a long vacation, or should I buy a new house or whatever? Variety of options with the goal of putting forward a unified proposal around the second anniversary of the war, when many top officials will be gathering in Germany for the Munich Security Conference. They're having another one of those. I forgot that.
Every year.
Every year, that's great. So that's quite soon. The first debates have focused on what would be permissible under international law and under each nation's domestic laws as they consider Russia's likely legal responses and retaliatory measures. So, yeah. Earlier in the year, American officials said they thought the frozen assets could be used as a leverage to help force Russia to the negotiating table for a ceasefire. Why would they think this is leverage?
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, you've been holding these assets for for more than a year. Why would they think that it would now serve as leverage? I mean, hasn't done anything so far. So presumably, in return, Moscow would be given access to some of its assets. But Russia has shown no interest in such negotiations. And now officials argue that beginning to use the funds may push Moscow to move to the negotiating table. So again, they're going to use the funds, and that's going to push them. I don't understand the logic here. they're going to, help themselves to these funds. And rather than provoke Russian fury and retaliation, they'll say, yeah, you got us. Yeah, that's it. We're heading to the negotiating table. Give you whatever you want.
Well, and George, even if under some ridiculous hypothetical situation, Russia goes to the negotiating table, and in the end, they say, well, no, but you forfeited your money anyway. Okay, that's what.
Oh yeah, of course, exactly,
Of course.
absolutely, yeah. Among the options that Western countries have discussed are seizing the assets directly and transferring them to Ukraine, using interest earned and other profits from the assets that are held in European financial institutions to Ukraine's benefit, or using the assets as collateral for loans to Ukraine. So collateral for loans, they don't pay the loans back, so we get to keep the collateral. Well, that's a nice
Yeah, but that's a nice sleight of hand, using the assets as collateral. Who's collateral? Who's the ownership of this?
Well, exactly. So, well, that'll do. Hey, Ukraine didn't pay the money back. Well, of course, Ukraine isn't going to pay. Ukraine never pays any money back, so we get to keep the collateral. Dalip Singh, a former top Biden administration official, suggested in an interview that the immobilized reserves should be placed into an escrow account that Ukraine's Ministry of Finance could have access to and be used as collateral for new bonds that Ukraine would issue. If Ukraine can successfully repay the debt over a period of 10 to 30 years, then Russia could potentially have its frozen assets back. So if Ukraine can repay its debts, Russia can have its frozen assets back. Now, what's the likelihood any of that is going to happen? That Ukraine pays off its debt?
I don't know. Whoever wrote this was probably sitting in a bar having some very nice scotch. Okay, I mean, this is just so delusional. It's barely worth commenting on, George. I'm sorry. It's just stupid.
It is. If they can't repay, my hunch is that Russia probably has something to do with that.
This guy knows a lot about geopolitics.
Chief global economist at PGIM Fixed Income, making a nice little packet. And so in that way, Russia has a stake in Ukraine's emergence as a sovereign, independent economy and country. So imagine that, Russia, we want our assets back, so we'll just simply, have a vested interest in bankrolling Ukraine, because then we'll get some of our assets back. That's brilliant. That's almost genius.
Well, George, it always goes back to this, and it's part of their worldview. They don't see it because it's part of their intellectual or limited intellectual DNA, is that they assume what's in other people's interests.
Yes, always.
All the time.
All the time, exactly.
But Putin is thinking about this. How do you know that? Okay.
That's a classic. It's always, Putin's idea was this and this. Putin was obviously thinking this. Where has he said this? I mean, he talks a great deal. Where is he given any indication that that's what he's thinking? And so settling on a solid legal rationale has been one of the biggest challenges for policymakers as they decide how to proceed. Solid legal rationale. So how do we invent something that we can say it sounds legalese? It sounds, that's in accord with the law. Proponents of seizing Russia's assets, such as former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers, one of the dumbest characters around. I mean, it's like, the idea.
He even screwed up that gig at Harvard.
Yeah. I mean, that's the easiest gig that you can have.
Yeah.
And he lost it. Yeah.
Just keep your mouth shut. Collect the donors' checks. That's all you do. Cocktail parties, buffets, just take the checks. That's all you're supposed to do.
That's all you do. That's all. And there's a lot of checks coming in. Harvard is not short of funds.
That's a full-time job, George.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure he has to worry about the condition of his liver. Okay.
I think so. I mean, you basically you're having long, big lunches with donors. That's it. That's your job. You wining and dining donors. Proponents have argued that nations that hold Russian assets are entitled to cancel their obligations to Russia and apply those assets to what Russia owes for its breach of international law under so-called international law of state countermeasures. That's Lawrence Summers' idea? That's his is that the argument that he advanced to the New York Times, that they can cancel their obligations? So we're not giving you your money back under what? Under the so-called international law of state countermeasures.
What is this so-called? I mean, is it international law of state countermeasures, or why are you saying so-called?
It doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
That's right. You're just helping it. And then, of course, they come up with, they note that after Iraq's invasion, this is clearly the talking point. They're all repeating this talking point. They note that after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, $50 billion of Iraqi funds were seized and transferred through the United Nations to compensate victims in Iraq and other countries. That was, again, it was the United Nations Security Council resolution, just like the force that was used against Iraq was sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council. This one was, the next one wasn't, but this one was. So that's how the money was then, that's why it went through the United Nations, because the UN Security Council could then just simply issue its resolution and then, you know, they say, hey, everybody has to comply with it. But in any case, that was just money that Iraq was earning from its oil sales. So it wasn't like, you know, they were holding assets in a bank and then we can just seize it. So it was just, you know, the slice of their revenues. Robert Zoellick, another one, former World Bank president, has been making the case to a group of 7 finance ministers that as long as they act in unison, seizing Russian assets would not have an impact on their currency or the status of the dollar. Notice that, you know, again, over and over, we're quoting Americans. Then we had Philip Zelikow, then we have Robert Zoellick.
So if you pull the caper off in unison, everything will work, right?
Right, exactly. That's right. Yeah, exactly. So
we have power in numbers. Okay,
that's right. That's right. Exactly. We either hang together or we hang separately.
So it's just, you know, if we in unison act like thugs, we'll make it through.
That's right. He suggested that other countries were unlikely to rush to put their money into another currency, such as the renminbi. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, you know, if you don't think that your assets are safe when you're holding dollars or euros, you are going to go somewhere else. I mean, people, you know, people aren't stupid and say, well, yeah, but you know, I still trust the dollar. I still trust the euro. Why? I mean, you know, you have to be bloody stupid. So of course they're going to look for somewhere else to put their money. One of the obstacles in the United States for seizing Russian assets has been the view within the Biden administration that being able to lawfully do so would require an act of Congress. So that's
it's just muddying the waters.
Of course, of course it is. But you see, they think that we can get that. Maybe we can get it. Maybe we can pass a law in Congress, and then they'll say, oh yeah, it's legal. It's legal. Congress has passed the legislation. At a news conference in Germany last year, Janet Yellen highlighted that concern. While we're beginning to look at this, it would not be legal now in the United States for the government to seize those statutes. It's not something that is legally permissible in the United States. Since then, however, Ms. Yellen has become more open to the idea of seizing Russia's assets to aid Ukraine. She's become open. You know, she's talked to the lawyers and have made a persuasive case. With Ukraine running low on funds and ammunition, the debate about how to provide more aid could shift from a legal question to a moral question. How can you shift from a legal question to a moral question? I mean, you can just simply say, well, now it's a moral imperative, but if it's against the law, then it doesn't.
So doing something illegal is moral.
Yeah, that's the argument. Oh, well, it's moral because we have to help Ukraine. So I can steal money from you because it's moral that I go help somebody else. So, okay, I'll just take this money, but if there's a moral case for it. So here is an article from the New York Times the other day, just on the issue of what was Russia going to do? So this was the New York Times, said how Putin turned a Western boycott into a bonanza. And then it says, soon after Russian troops invaded his country, the Ukrainian president Zelensky made a plea to Western companies, leave Russia, he said, make sure that the Russians do not receive a single penny. Hundreds of companies answered the call. Politicians, activists predicted that it would help strangle the Russian economy, undermine the Kremlin's war effort. Putin had other plans. Mr. Putin has turned the exit of major Western companies into a windfall for Russia's loyal elite and for the state itself. He has forced companies.
Why do you have to say Russia's loyal elite?
Yes, well, you have to say.
A lot of very, very savvy business people here. I mean, really savvy. I experience it every day, George.
Right. He has forced companies wishing to sell to do so at fire sale prices. Yeah, I mean, that's what happened. I mean, if you're moving out, yeah, it's going to be fire sale prices. They're not going to give you a great deal. You want to get out. Yeah, okay. You're going to fire sale price. He has limited sales to buyers anointed by Moscow. Anointed. Sometimes he has seized firms outright. He has seized them, so he gets to keep the firms. And then it says, a New York Times investigation traced how Mr. Putin has turned an expected misfortune into an enrichment scheme. Western companies.
It's a scheme.
Well, it's a scheme. There's a scheme there. And then enrichment, so it sounds like, he's lining his own pockets. Western companies that have announced departures have declared more than $103 billion in losses since the start of the war, according to a Times analysis. Mr. Putin has squeezed companies for as much of that wealth as possible by dictating the terms of their departure. He has also subjected those exits to ever-increasing taxes, generating at least $1.25 billion in the past year for Russia's war chest. How do you know it's the war chest? That money is going to the war chest.
War chest.
But I'm just showing you, this article, I think, was about 2 days ago in the New York Times. So here they're talking about, oh yeah, we can do all this to Russia. And then, well, this is your previous scheme of how to not hobble Russia. Didn't work out so well. And this is according to the New York Times. So,
but here it is, George. I mean, an expected misfortune into a enrichment scheme. But what they're trying to do with Russian assets in the West, that's not a scheme.
No, that's not a scheme. No. Because, of course, what they're doing in the West is theft. There's no theft going on. They're the ones that decided to leave. And then they say, well, okay, these are the terms. I mean, if you're leaving, you can't then start haggling about how much you're going to sell your assets for. No private deal is safe. The Dutch beer company Heineken found a buyer this spring and set a price. But the Russian government unilaterally rejected the deal, people close to the negotiation said, and put the company's Russian holdings in the hands of an aerosol packaging titan married to a former Russian senator. In all, Mr. Putin has overseen one of the biggest transfers of wealth within Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union. Huge swathes of industries, elevators, tires, industrial coatings, and more, are now in the hands of increasingly dominant Russian players. Then it goes on, today in Russia, a robust consumer world carries on, helping Mr. Putin maintain a sense of normalcy despite a war that has proved longer, deadlier, and costlier than he predicted.
How do you know that?
Did he make that prediction? He never did. The Russians, he never made a prediction.
Did you ask him that? Did he answer that?
And he's not making any predictions now. He's never said, well, I think, this is the day.
No, he's been frustratingly, no, he is not making predictions. Yes.
Most foreign companies remain in Russia unwilling to lose the billions they've invested there over decades. Other businesses have been sold and now have a through the looking glass feel. Krispy Kreme is now Crunchy Dream. Its donuts come in a similar flat box with familiar flavors. Starbucks has been reborn as Stars Coffee. Its mermaid is now a Russian swan princess. And then Mr. Putin's economic counterstrikes have helped to fortify support among the elites profiting from the war to blunt the effects of Western isolation. While Ukraine is preoccupied with short-term imperatives like shoring up international support, the relative resilience of the Russian economy has enabled Mr. Putin to play a long game. Previously undisclosed documents, financial statements, and interviews with dozens of deal makers in Russia and across Europe show that Moscow now micromanages practically every exit. Companies must navigate an opaque system to win approval to sell. In some cases, Mr. Putin's friends have appealed directly to him to intervene.
Well, that's a lot of hyperbole. When it's public knowledge about companies that want to leave the Russian market. A lot of companies came here because they got tax breaks and things like that. Building roads for them or a warehouse. Every case is different, okay? But Russia is no different than any other country in the world. Negotiating Bezos, opening up a new huge conglomeration in New York. Well, the New York City government was making all kinds of deals and all. Same thing applies in Russia. It's no different.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And of course, again, if a company decides, well, we're quitting the United States, you're not going to get a great deal if you decide, well, I'm going to just abandon it. Yeah, they're going to sit, buy your assets at fire sale prices. I mean, that's, you're not going to say, well, yeah, but I want a really good price for my assets. You're not going to do it. I mean, if you've decided to leave, then that's it. But there's no indication here that Russia wants anyone to leave. So if you've decided to stay on, you're good to go. I mean, you're not facing any difficulties. It's only those who decided to leave that they have to sell at fire sale prices.
Well, this article only mentioned a couple of cases where there's a rebranding. I can tell everyone here that has happened on a massive scale, okay, where the storefront is exactly the same, except for, oh, now it's written in Cyrillic. It's not in French anymore, okay?
Right.
I mean, it's over and over and over again. And one of some of the cases is that they're sold into different holdings. A lot of Gulf countries have gotten involved in this. Turkey is very big in this, and it's because these companies want to stay. They desperately want to say when the EU is going into recession, Russia's going to see up to 3% plus GDP growth next year, even higher maybe. Yeah, this is a good market to be in.
Right. Well, this is the thing, that it was always ridiculous to think that somehow sanctions are going to bring the Russian economy to its knees. I mean, you can apply sanctions against small countries and bring them to their knees. Even then, it's not that easy to do, but you can really hurt small countries. But when he's a bloody big country like Russia, I mean, it was nuts to think that you're going to bring this country to its knees. It's like sanctioning the United States. I mean, you really think if you sanction the United States, you're going to bring the U.S. economy to its knees?
As far as the sanctions are concerned, think about it this way. It's upper middle class people and rich people that are denied some of the nice little luxuries of life. And luxuries by definition are a luxury. It's not necessary. So, I mean, if there's some cosmetics and things like that, Dyson hair dryers, which women love, but you still can get them. You can get them on the secondary market. You get almost everything on the secondary market with a slight premium to pay. So, but if you're a working class, middle class family, you don't even know the country is sanctioned.
Last summer, Mr. Putin seized the Russian arm of the Danish brewer Carlsberg, along with roughly $500 million in cash, and put them under the temporary control of one of his friends. Again, notice that seized. I mean, what do you mean seized? Did they take it away from them? I don't think that that's what they did. At least 4 other companies have similarly lost control of their operations this year to effective state seizures. Today, Mr. Putin is at the helm of a fraught exit process that works to Russia's advantage. But he began in the early days of the war with the urgent goal of simply keeping the Russian economy alive. That's it.
The urgent goal to keep the Russian economy alive. Well, that's just absolute nonsense. There's nothing to that.
Of course not. But that was it, and that was the nonsensical idea that you could do this, and Russia just will just fall on its knees. Russia won't have any means of retaliating. And then here the Times says, well, yeah, they kind of did have a means of retaliating. They just simply bought up these assets at bargain basement prices, which is, of course, what you would have predicted will happen. You say we're leaving the Russian market. Well, you're going to lose a lot of money as a result. I mean, that's common sense.
Well, see, also, George, these Western leaders just have no sense of foresight, because whatever is the outcome in Ukraine, Western businesses are not necessarily going to be welcomed here. I mean, if you're going to be intimidated by your governments to get out of a market, why should we even bother with you? Okay, I mean, the long-term consequences of this are really great. Okay, and much to my surprise, I got a lot of this right in the beginning, but I was very much surprised at how many other foreign and now domestic companies have filled the breach. I mean, it's really been quite amazing, and in such a short amount of time. And plus, I've always been, after living here for so long, Russians can make good things too, okay? And they are. They've learned, by necessity this time, okay? And that's what it takes for these people. You have to say, you really got to do it. You got your back against the wall, do it. And they do, okay?
No, that's inevitable, because, of course, if you're able to make missiles and you're able to make railways, rolling stock, you can make missile defense
power plants.
Yeah, exactly. Nuclear power plants. You can do all that. Then you can also make consumer goods. It's just that you don't bother because you can get great consumer goods from Germany or Japan. But if the necessity arises, well, of course you can do it. If you can do one thing, you have the industrial skills to do something else. It just before you didn't bother with it because you could just rely on imports. But now you do it. So of course it's ridiculous to think, oh, now suddenly they don't have anything. Oh, and it's like, oh, that's it. We're giving up. And so and that's the same thing that goes here with this notion. We talked about this these foreign currency reserves. The thinking behind it is that somehow we take it from the Russians, we give it to Ukraine, and that's going to bring them to the negotiating table. It's never explained.
Well, I mean,
what are the logical steps that leads to? But then they're going to come to the negotiating table.
In everything that we've reviewed here is that they haven't. None of these writers and great thinkers like Lawrence Summer. Oh, wow. Okay, and these Stanford people. Wow, I'm impressed. Is that this will be part of the negotiating process to end this conflict? That's going to be. You blew up the pipeline. Somebody's got to pay for it. Okay, you stole our assets. Somebody's got to pay for that. That's because you know what? You made the pipeline and Russian sovereign assets part of this equation. So we're going to do it too. It's part of the equation. You brought these elements into it. We're going to agree with you. Yeah, for a cessation, a culmination of this conflict, we're going to have to put all the cards on the table, okay?
Right.
They're just ridiculous thinking on their part. Is it Russia wouldn't demand something on its side when it's holding all the high cards?
Right. But it was, I don't believe there will be any negotiations, and I don't think they're ever going to give any of this money back. But it will have all sorts of consequences down the road, which will be very adverse to the West. Because the West just doesn't give anything back. I mean, that's not the way it's wired. That's it. We've got it. We keep it. I mean, it's like
George. Even if there was a smashing Ukrainian victory with the tanks rolling down to the Kremlin. The sanctions against Russia will never be lifted. No. In the European Union, it's open on something. American sanctions, once they're passed, they're always there.
They're always there. It was it when Iran, the Iran Revolution, which is now 1979. So it's now, soon will be half a century. The Americans seized Iran's assets. They've never given them back. It's like, a little bit dribs and drabs. They give a little back. But basically they've kept all this, these assets for now almost 50 years. They're not going to do it. They're not going to give it back at all. So that's it. Once they take something, that's it. We get to keep it, and that's the same thing here.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the equation, and it's baked in. Okay, nobody is surprised by that. Though George does bring up a question. We've mentioned it before. Why they allowed $300 billion in assets to be exposed like that? I have no idea, and George doesn't either. So
I don't know. Maybe the woman who's head of the Russian central bank. She doesn't seem that great. Her name begins with N. Nasri, whatever her name is.
Nabulina.
Nabulina, that's it. Nabulina. Maybe her incompetence. I don't know. But it doesn't make any sense to keep them there. It's just,
well, I mean, the rationale is that it would tip the hand, that the Russians were going to invade. I don't understand that either.
No, okay? I don't understand that.
Their money.
It's their money, and it's something that they've been talking about for a long time, which is that we're not going to keep our assets in dollars and euros. It's something that the Russian government has been saying for a long time, that our intent is to divest from dollars and euros. So it wouldn't have tipped anyone's hands up. It's like, yeah, well, this is a long-standing Russian policy.
And, in import substitution, they've been talking about that, right, since the cows came home, okay? And I've always said, where is it? Okay, and now it's happening, right, because they had no other choice.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll get George and I, we've been watching this story. We put a lot of effort into it today. It's very important, and it's crossing the Rubicon, and the implications are immense, not just immediately, but in midterm and long term. The West just doesn't get it. They just can't, no, because we can't get money from Congress and Urban and all that. We're going to steal someone else's. Wow, that's like dealing with room temperature intelligence people.
But I think best of all is when the Americans say, well, what about the legal basis for it? They say, hey, these are sovereign nations, these are sovereign assets. Well, maybe we can get Congress to pass legislation, and that will make it legal. Oh, well, okay, well, as long as Congress passes it, then that makes it legal. It's just like we got permission from Congress.
The ultimate punchline to all of this is the Europeans will be the ones that'll pay the cost in the end. Yeah.
As always, hey, you're the one who's going to get clobbered over the side of the head, as you did over energy. Yeah, we got to basically, Nord Stream. We're going to end our dependence on Russian energy. Who's going to suffer? Not the Americans. Americans, is energy rich. You. So this again, you're going to get clobbered.
And the Europeans face being shut out. See, they want to shut the Russians out of Europe, but ultimately, George, in the larger scheme of things, it's the Europeans that are shutting themselves out of the Russian market. Yeah. Not a good idea.
No. It really is. And they're getting pushed. And it's clear that they get caught. I'm not happy about this. Go to these lawyers, French and German lawyers. No, this is not. I don't think this is in accord with international law. It doesn't matter what you think. It only matters what Washington thinks. They determine these things. We say it's in accord with the law, and so therefore you have to do it. So it's always like this.
All right, we're going to keep an eye on this. Laser focused as usual here. Okay, and this is this is the Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on Locals, so please go to gaggle.locals.com. This is Friday, and the holiday season is upon us. George, are you going to have a live stream on Tuesday?
Yeah, but that's already after Christmas. That's So it's on Boxing Day. Yes, yeah. So we have a live stream, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join me. Come with comments, criticisms, ideas, suggestions. On the way out the door, think about little Buddy, because Buddy's also been thinking about, seizing assets. I want to start seizing some assets and then transferring them lock, stock, and barrel into the tip jar.
That's going to be a big tip jar. Ooh.
Exactly, the tip jar, and I've got the enabling legislation already on hand. I've got the template, and I'm about, I'm printing it out. So, we're very worried that Buddy is going to start breaking the law very soon. To avoid that, if you have a few bob in your pocket.
Well, I mean, the Chihuahua World Court has about as much standing as the U.S. Congress on this one. Remember that.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So exactly. So he's not too bothered about the Chihuahua World Court. So we're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and above all, we're going to keep Buddy on the straight and narrow. To say yes, he's a law-abiding Chihuahua. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.